I'll introduce myself. I'm Damaris Choti. I'm assistant to the director of the African Studies Center. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this African Tea Time that is going to focus on Zambia and Nigeria. And the topic, as most of you might know, is food security in this COVID era, what's going on in that region. I really don't want to introduce the speakers because some of us who have been here attending African Tea Time, we have 3 facilitators for the African Tea Time. And one is Ebenezer Ansa, and another is Dr. Awadu Jorem. Eben is a grad student. Actually, he's not a student now, he's a candidate, doctoral candidate in the Department of Community Sustainability, and he's going to be leading the discussion today. And he's very popular, he knows that. And we have Dr. Awadu. Those of us who were here last week already heard from him. He's one of our facilitators as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Awadu, for joining us today. One person that I would like to mention that is not here, that if you saw the program was supposed to be the facilitator, is Dr. Tutilo Mudumba. He is currently in Uganda. He's a professor, faculty member there, and he was an alum of MSU as well. So these are our 3 facilitators, and we're so happy that Eben was able to jump in and take the place of facilitation today. So I will stop here because Eben is going to do the introductions of our speakers. Thank you so much, really, for our presenter speakers to be able to join us from Nigeria. It's very late. Zambia, the same thing. It's, I think Zambia, it's 11 p.m. and then
yes,
it is 11 p.m. and then in Nigeria right now it's 10. So it's a privilege to have you share with us at this time. So Eben, please, I invite you to take over.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Damaris, for the introduction, and welcome everyone. If this is your first time, this is the African Tea Time, where we learn about the African continent and the various countries and what's going on in them. So the structure is that for this semester, we have various topics that we are learning about, especially related to the COVID-19 and what's happening in and around Africa. And so for each topic, we focus on 2 countries for the presentations. And then we zone in from those countries to talk about the broad perspectives on the continent as a whole. So for today,
we lost him for a bit. All right, perhaps I can. Okay, I can go ahead and introduce the speakers as we wait for him to get back. In a second.
He's back.
He's back?
Am I back?
Oh, who's going to pull up my, okay.
Sorry about that. It looks like my internet wants to play with me, but pardon me for that. So I was saying that for each day, we focus on 2 countries, and then we take the conversation to the broader perspectives on the continent. So, I mean, food and agriculture ties in with most of the things that happen in our lives on a daily basis. And so coincidentally, today being the last tea time for the semester, we are here to talk about food. And I expect this to be a very interesting conversation because all the things that we've talked about with regards to COVID-19 and its impacts have in one way or the other something to do with food security and how people are feeding themselves during these times. So it's very interesting that we are talking about food security in Africa as the topic for our last tea time for the semester. And it's good to have Nigeria and Zambia because these 2 countries are particularly these 2 countries are particularly important when it comes to agriculture on the continent and food issues. So we are happy to have 2 presenters, one representing each country, that's Nigeria and Zambia. For Nigeria, we have Dr. Adewale Obadina, and then for Zambia, we have Brian Mulenga, and Dr. Adewale will talk to us about the situation of food security in Nigeria in the face of the pandemic and what the projection is of the impact of COVID-19 on Nigeria's food system going forward. And then Brian will also talk about measures that were put in place by the Zambian government, and then what the Zambian food security status is in the face of COVID-19, and what the country's food security outlook is like right now, and then in the medium term. So we will have Dr. Adewale go first and then talk to us about Nigeria's food security in the face of COVID, and then what we are expecting to see. And then once he is done, we will follow up with Brian's presentation. When the two presenters are done, then we'll come together and then have discussions and conversations around the issues that they talked about in their presentation. So I will entreat all of us and encourage us to put down our questions in the chat column, or if we want to note them and ask them verbally when the time comes, that's also allowed. So feel free to put down your questions in the chat or note them so that we can bring them all for the discussion when the presentations are done. Before they go into their presentations, the presenters will tell us a bit more about themselves and what they do, and then they go into their presentations. So at this point, Dr. Adewale, if you are ready.
Yeah, I'm ready. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and also good evening, depending on where you are joining us for this very important webinar. My name is Obadina, that is my surname, and Adewale Olusegun. I am the present head of department, Food Science and Technology, Federal University of Agriculture, Abeokuta in Nigeria. Today, I'm going to share with us the food security in Africa during and post-COVID-19. So my focus is going to be on Nigeria, which is my country. From this slide, we can all see where Nigeria is located within the globe. Nigeria is located in West Africa, and that is a picture of Nigeria in red within the map of West Africa, and West Africa is within the globe. Nigeria, this is the map of Nigeria. Nigeria, as I said, is situated within West Africa, and Nigeria has border with some other countries within Africa, which are Niger, Chad, Cameroon, Togo, Benin Republic. These are countries within West Africa that share the same border with Nigeria. Nigeria, in terms of area, is 923,768 kilometers square in terms of area. And Nigeria has 36 states. 36 states within the country, including the Federal Capital Territory, which is called Abuja. Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa, and the last population census taken in Nigeria puts Nigeria at 195.9 million people, even though there are statistics that says Nigeria is more than this. but this is the last census taken in Nigeria. In Nigeria, the informal sector contributes more than 65% to the GDP of the country. Therefore, agriculture employs 70% of the working population in Nigeria. And this is giving us the idea that Nigeria is an agrarian country. These are the different states within Nigeria. Nigeria is also divided into 6 geographical zones. We have where we call the Southeast region, and this is the Southeast region. We have the South-South region, which is here. In each of these regions, we have 6 states. 6 states. And we have the Southwest region of the country, which is this. We also have the North Central region of Nigeria. We have the Northeast region, which is here, and we have the Northwest region. I am from the Southwest region. As I said in the introduction, my university is located here, Ogun State, within the Southwest region. And the Southwest region is where you have most of the elites within the country. And this is where we have the most popular states in Nigeria, which happens to be the former capital of Nigeria, that is Lagos State. Lagos State, to my university, Ogun State, is just 1 hour drive from the airport. And Lagos is also known as the capital hub for Nigeria. This is where you have almost everything happening in Nigeria. The name of our president is President Muhammadu Buhari. Muhammadu Buhari happens to be once military head of state in the country before he became a civilian elected president. He has already served his first term in office, and he was re-elected the second time, and is going to finish his second term in office by the year 2023. Nigeria as a country run a system where the president spent 5 years term and is also eligible for re-election after the first term. The major sources of income of Nigeria is crude oil and non-crude oil. Nigeria is highly blessed with crude oil. Nigeria is one of the oil-producing countries in the world, OPEC. So Nigeria gained more of its income from proceeds that they get from crude oil. Well, this third source of income is an arguable source because Nigeria, as one of the developing countries, also rely on external borrowing and foreign aid from the international communities. I want to go into my presentation now. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, there have been serious concerns about the impact of the pandemic on agri-food systems. When we talk about the agricultural food systems, we are talking about all the operations that happens within the value chain from the farm to fork. We talk about harvesting, we talk about processing, we talk about transportation, we talk about value addition, we talk about marketing, and we talk about consumption. So COVID-19 outbreak has really affected these food systems. Therefore, the concerns are compounded by the fragile state of the continent's health and food systems. It's no more in news that the pandemic started in China last year, November. And this is a pandemic that has really caused a lot of challenge in the whole world. In Nigeria, we recorded the first case in February 27, year 2020. And by that time, by the time that this presentation is being put together, Nigeria has already recorded 64,336 cases. And out of these cases, 1,602 deaths has been recorded. So meaning that 64,336 cases were confirmed, and out of this, 1,602 people have died. There has been investigations made by various researchers on the effect of the pandemic on food and nutrition security within the country. And during the survey, one of what one of the output or outcome of the survey is that at the local market, the price of farm produce was low during the COVID-19. Why? Because the buyers were not allowed to come to the market due to restriction of movement. So there was a glut of produce and no money in circulation. As I said, that more than 70% of the working force in the country are attracted or are attached to farming, to agriculture. So the restriction in movement really affects the system because people cannot go to farm. The farmers cannot take their produce to the market. And because of this, there was glut. And once there was glut, there was no money in circulation. And the restriction is reversed in the regional markets because of this restriction on the transportation of goods, especially interstates. In interstates, vehicles are allowed to move. So some people can still transport their goods from one state to the other. But when it comes to markets within local markets, there are challenges. COVID-19 period is associated with a reduction in labor availability and increase in labor costs. Let me also inform us that now in Nigeria, everything is normal. All the restriction has been relaxed, 100% relaxed. People are now moving around freely. people are afraid to go to their places of work, and people are also afraid to do what they do before. The only thing that happens now is that people are continuously advised and encouraged to put all the COVID-19 protocols in place, like covering of nose and mouth, washing of hands as part of the protocol for COVID-19, and social distancing. So that is still on, but people are free to move around. The airports are open, the markets are open, the schools are also opened. But the report that I'm giving here are things that happened when the lockdown was still on, and how this affects the food and nutrition security of the country. Now, as I said, because of the lockdown, labor that are needed in the farm by the farmers are not available. And the few that are available in their locality increase their labor cost, and this affects the produce. It was also discovered that about 79% of households reported decreased activities on their farms as a result of the reduced labor availability. And as I mentioned, this is due to the restriction of movement. It was also confirmed that there were also reduced in the availability of farm inputs because of the restriction of movement, fertilizers that the farmers needed, the agrochemicals that they needed to assist them in farming, in carrying out their farming operations, are also not available. Now, those that had their produce before the lockdown, before the restriction of movement, could not sell their produce because markets were closed. So this also resulted in food insecurity. For those of them that has this produce, some of them decided to sell at the farm gates because they face challenges of transportation costs. The few transportation operators that can move, because they need to obtain clearance from the government before they can move. So the few people that had that opportunity to obtain the clearance jacked up the cost of transportation. And this also affects the sales and the price of agricultural commodities. But it was also observed that 82% reported a decline in the number of buyers coming to purchase farm produce directly from them. And this is at the high side, 82% decline. So definitely the farmers are really affected. They have the produce, but there are challenges in selling their produce. Availability of services for agricultural production. As I said, these are outputs of research that was conducted on the effect of the pandemic on the food and nutrition security within the country. The majority of respondents reported a decline in the availability of rental land, purchased farm inputs, tillage services, extension services, and credit facilities since the start of the COVID crisis in Nigeria. And as I mentioned earlier, we can easily fetch out the cost of this. And all this led to an increase in the price of land, input, and tillage services in their communities. So the farmers did not find it easy at all to carry out their operations during this period or during the period of the pandemic in the country. The issue of food and nutrition security. Within the first 3 months of COVID-19 pandemic, as I said, this started in February in Nigeria. In the first 3 months of this period, over 82% of respondent households were unable to eat healthy and nutritious food because of a lack of resources. Definitely, when these produce are not available in the market, people could not get them to purchase and also to consume. So there was really a problem of nutrition security. People eat, they eat not because they wanted to eat those produce, but they only eat those things that are available for consumption. Most households, in which 81% belongs to, ate only a few kinds of food, implying that there was declining dietary diversity. As I said, they consume what was available to them. And 78% of these households skipped meals or ate less than they thought they should due to inadequate resources. And this was because many households ran out of food stock. So they skipped meals because it was really difficult for people to get food to eat. The market are closed. So people try to manage whatever they have. And it also got to a stage when the government was trying to have a kind of change in the policy, that they now said, okay, that people should stay at home from a particular time to a particular time of the day, or in some states, they say people should stay at home for 2 days. The third day, the markets are allowed to open. So during that period, people can go to the market, buy foods that they need, and stock their different homes. And in another 2 days, everywhere was locked. So it was like that in some states, and this really affects the nutrition security of the populace. Nearly 1 out of 5 households, which we have 18% within this group, reported having members go hungry for a whole day after the COVID-19 crisis began. Now, what are the responses to the threat of COVID-19 in Nigeria? The federal government instituted several regulations that may have had unintentional negative impact on the livelihood of households. 1, there was restriction of movement and shutdown of schools. And when this happens, only 54% of girls and 46% of boys continue with their schoolwork at home during the pandemic when we had school closures. And during this period, the government tried also as much as possible to come up with programs on air, sponsor program, educational program on air, in radio, and digital programs. But if you look at the data, despite all this that the government tried to do, we still have low number of students that key into this program. 54% of girls and 46% of boys. don't forget, these children need food. They need food, and food were not available. It was a challenge. Furthermore, there was decrease in participation in farming activities. About 79% of households could not involve in this, while off-farm employment opportunities were also severely curtailed, both inside and outside the village. These are responses to the threats that happened during this period. The majority of the sample households, which are 51%, did not receive any form of COVID-19 related assistance during the first 3 months of the pandemic. In most of the developed countries, the assistance rendered by the government are more felt by the citizenry. But in Nigeria, majority did not receive this assistance. The palliative were not gotten to people. A small number of households reported receiving assistance from religious organizations. Various religious organizations, churches, mosques, try to assist their members by giving them palliative during this period. And we should also not forget that we said during this period, there are restrictions of movement. So it was also difficult for these organizations to reach out to their members that they wanted to assist with these palliatives. So you can see the figure. What the government was able to give out was just 15% of the populace. And family members also tried to assist, and this was as much as 10%. 10%. So these are the figures that shows us how things were done during the period of the pandemic. Now I want to talk about the post-COVID issue. The challenges of COVID-19 is hampering the attainment of food security in Nigeria, and it is deepening. Even though people have not started feeling this. During that period where there were total lockdown, farmers are not going to the farm. No cultivation. Plants, crops that are supposed to be cultivated during this period were not cultivated. And this will seriously affect food security of the country. The impact is already being felt in the form of rising food prices. Things are going higher. Price of foodstuff is skyrocketing. As at April of this year, food inflation has already risen to 15% compared to the 14.7% in December last year. As a result of this, both lives and livelihood are at risk from this ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, as the availability and access to food are rapidly coming into question. Price of foodstuffs are still going up. In my own home, my wife needs to go and buy grains and keep at home because the price is just going up and we can't control this. So these are output, these are results of the post-COVID challenges. As we all know, in the whole world, there is a growing concern, which is all about which is trying to face a looming food crisis. Unless there is adequate measure definitely there's going to be global food supply chains operational and sustainable. So this is going to be a challenge, except people come together and look into how this challenge of global food supply challenges can be overcome. Therefore, mitigating the pandemic impact across the food system has become fundamental. It's not only a challenge in Nigeria, this is a global challenge that also needs global solutions. I know that there's going to be UN summit next year, March. And during this period, there's going to be food summits in which the key players, the global key players, need to look at how this global challenge can be looked into or can be tackled. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed critical security risk of the entire global food system, which is long and complex supply chains. The whole food system is facing a serious challenge with this pandemic. I want to quickly make few recommendations. One, there is need to implement more robust targeted social protection programs, which will help to improve access to healthy and nutritious food. I choose my words here, healthy and nutritious food, not just any food. The food that we need are these particular issues. And how can this be achieved? One, there's need to provide adequate emergency food aid wherever possible with local and regional purchase of food for food assistance. Secondly, there's need to maintain robust social safety nets, recognizing that household food expenditures rise and fall in relation to other expenditures, e.g., housing, healthcare, education, etc. So there's need to have a robust system that can assist. Thirdly, there's also need to design food assistance programs that offer adequate access to healthy food, not just sufficient calories. Because the health status of the populace is also very important at this particular period. Two, there's need to ensure proper protection on vulnerable and marginalized food system workers and farmers who are disproportionately affected by the crisis. And how can we achieve this? One, there's need to ensure food system workers' rights are recognized and integrated in national legislation. There's need to promote and enforce compliance with established norms. These are critical issues that need to be looked into. Secondly, there's also need to ensure food system workers have access to full protection from hazards and risk in terms of personal protective equipment, distancing measures, clear health and safety guidelines. There's need to pay the sick leave of these people, adequate sleeping, eating and sanitary facilities, and quarantine shelters. The food system workers need to be assisted with all these facilities. Thirdly, there's need to implement mechanisms to protect farmers and small agricultural producers from uncertainties and income losses, such as specific insurance, transfers, and input distribution. When all these are done, the vulnerable and marginalized food system workers and farmers will be happy and be ready to do all that needed to assist in moving the challenge of food insecurity. Number 3 recommendation is that there's need to provide better protection for countries that depend on food imports. Many of the countries in low, medium income countries, in which African countries are among, majorly depends on food importation. So there's need to discourage food export restrictions to protect these countries that rely on food imports. Secondly, there's need to provide policy space and support to countries seeking to improve their domestic food production capacity within their ecological boundaries in the medium and long term. And lastly, under this, on how to achieve this, is to encourage countries to build up better long-term grain storage capacity. This is a big challenge in Nigeria. Maybe I should chip in at this junction that Nigeria is one of the largest producers of grains in the whole world. But Nigeria do not have storage capacity that she can rely upon to feed its populace when there is a challenge. So this showcase during the pandemic, it was very difficult for the country to make grains available for its citizenry. There's also need to support to strengthen food system resilience, which is critical for an effective response to the COVID-19 pandemic. There's need for countries like Nigeria to invest more in agroecological research action projects. There is need to support the development of an agroecological curriculum at schools of agriculture in a range of countries. This is a time where we need more nutritious food. This is a time that we need to eat more of animal food. This is the time that we need to eat more balanced diet. This is the time that we need to do or eat less of carbohydrates or calorie food. Therefore, there's need to ensure sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, as well as animal production and forestry. And this needs to be integrated into the policy responses to COVID-19 so as to reap their full potential in terms of nutrition and livelihood. Thank you for listening. I believe when it's time to ask questions, we shall be able to brainstorm and talk more on how to put this forward. Thank you.
Sorry. I think that Eben is lost for a minute. Thank you so much, Dr. Wale. You gave me permission to call you Wale for the really detailed and informative presentation. Samuel, did you want to ask your question or you can wait until the end?
Yeah, if you guys don't mind, I was wondering what was the restriction you said about people coming back to work, like working on the farms? You said, I worded it here, the movement restrictions. So like, obviously like we're all in a quarantine state, but like, is it really drastic that people can't work on the farm just 6 feet apart? Like, can you just not leave your home if you're not anywhere near the farm?
Can I respond?
Sure, please go ahead. Because he asked the question in the chat sometimes, so I wasn't sure that he was planning to stay until the end. That's why I said perhaps we can give him a chance. But the other questions can come at the end, please, if you can allow us to do that. So Dr. Mulenga can go next. But please respond to that.
Okay, yeah, thank you, sir. So as I said, now the government have lifted uh, the restriction policy, and these are they have statistics to back this up because each state monitors the crisis, and these are made available at the uh, national level on the monitoring of the pandemic within the country at the national CDC level every day. So the government have gotten reliable information stating that the pandemic, I mean the COVID-19 issue in Nigeria has gone below the curve. So as a result of this, they've allowed everybody to go back to his working place, start work. So the farmers are also back to the farm. They are free now and they've started their planting. They've started doing the normal thing that they're supposed to do. So I hope I've been able to answer your question.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, awesome. Thank you, guys.
All right, you're very welcome. Eben is back, but I hope you will allow me to move on to the next speaker. Eben, are you here?
Yes.
Okay, you please welcome. We had one question from Samuel, but we can continue on to Dr. Mulenga. Please, yeah, you can pick up from here, Eben.
All right, great. Thanks. Thanks for standing in, Damaris. So at this point, we'll give it over to Brian. So Brian, you first introduce yourself and tell us a bit about yourself, and then you can go into the presentation. Thank you.
You're muted.
Brian, if you are speaking, you are muted, so we can't hear you.
Okay, you know what? I can unmute.
All right, can you get me now?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Perfect.
All right, thank you. Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. This part of the world where I am, it's very late in the night. I think it's 10 minutes to midnight. Yeah, and it's fun to make a presentation this time of the day. I think it's the first time I'm making a presentation this time of the day. But anyways, thank you so much, I think, for inviting me and IAPRI, the institution that I work for. My name is Brian Mulenga. I'm the research fellow at the Indo Agricultural Policy Research Institute, which is an ag policy think tank in Zambia with very strong collaboration with the Michigan State University dating back to 1999 to 2000. So at the Indo Agricultural Policy Research Institute, I work in the agricultural markets and trade thematic area, actually lead that thematic area. So most of my work is actually around ag markets and trade. And also I have a food in food security, but looking more at the national level and less at the micro level. So I think I can now jump into my presentation, if you allow me. So my presentation will be focusing on food security during and post-COVID-19 in Zambia. this is more or less the the flow of my presentation will go. So I'll first talk about Zambia, just give a brief and quick overview of what Zambia is about, and then I'll go into the introduction. Then I'll speak about some of the government and stakeholder responses to the COVID-19. I'll touch also on the effectiveness of some of the responses, the key responses, as they relate to food security. Then I'll talk about the current food security situation in Zambia, and then talk a bit about the short to medium term food security outlook. Then I'll give a summary and end with what IAPRI is doing to help with the COVID situation in the country. So let me start by giving a quick general bird's eye view of Zambia. So Zambia is located in the southern stroke central part of Africa. It's a landlocked country. That's the country that you see in green there. The map that you see, the gray, that's the whole of Africa. I think Dr. Adewale did a good job of showing, where Africa is positioned in the globe. And so Zambia has a landmass of about 752,000 square kilometers. And just to put this into context, for those who are very familiar with the US, is that it's slightly larger than the state of Texas. Administratively, Zambia's got 10 provinces, and each of these provinces has about, on average, maybe 6 to 7 districts. The population from the current estimates, actually, we were supposed to have a national census this year, but it's been moved to next year. The population is estimated at 16 million people. The capital city of Zambia is called Lusaka, and it's in Lusaka province. And Zambia is made up of 73 ethnic tribes. So you can see it's quite diverse, ethnically. And it's one of the reasons why, in fact, Zambia doesn't have, any other like a national language, like one language which everybody in the country would speak. But I must say that we have like 7 languages, I think, that common in almost all the corners of the country. In terms of politics, Zambia is a multi-party democracy. It became a multi-party democracy in 1991 after being under one-party rule from 1964 to about 1991. The economy of Zambia is mostly dependent on mining and processing. And in terms of formal stroke informal sector, with about 65 to 70% of Zambia's economy is informal. In terms of agriculture, the key crops include maize, which in the US is called corn. Then we also produce soybeans, cassava, rice, just to mention a few. Zambia also does produce a fair share of livestock, cattle, goats, sheep, to mention just a few. Our major exports, which are our traditional export, is actually copper, cobalt, and other minerals. So basically, that's uh, a general, profile and overview about Zambia. Now let me jump into the presentation. So as a way of introduction, like most African countries, Zambia recorded its first COVID-19, 3 months after its outbreak in, in China. So we had our first COVID case that was reported and recorded on March 18, 2020. And this was in the capital, Lusaka. And then it quickly spread to the Copper Belt, which is also a major, urban province. And then the virus quickly spread to other major cities and rural areas. But must mention that the spread in the rural areas was quite slow, and this was a good thing. I mean, because most of our food is produced in the rural areas, and so the fact that the infection rates and the intensity of the infections in the rural areas was low, I think helped quite a lot. Here, I just present a map to show, the distribution of, recorded COVID cases in the country. The greener the patch is, so those are the 10 provinces of Zambia, and this is from March to September. These are cumulative cases. So the greener the patch is, the higher the infection rates. And so the ones that I've circled in red, that's like the major urban, that's where the major urban districts or provinces in Zambia are. And as you can see, Lusaka and Copperbelt, which are the major urban provinces, had and still have the highest infection rates. Most of the rural areas, which are also major food production regions, were less affected by the COVID-19. So government and stakeholders and other stakeholders, the cooperating partners, the UN agencies, the NGOs, responded quite swiftly to try and contain the spread of the pandemic. Government instituted a number of measures, which included movement restrictions within and even across districts. Then schools and colleges, universities were completely closed. Then restaurants and other businesses also were closed, but just temporarily. But most of the entertainment businesses, bars, nightclubs, liquor stores, these were closed for quite a long time. And let me be quick to mention that these actually employ a lot of people in Zambia. And so their closure, resulted in business losses, which then also had an effect on people's jobs, threatened people's incomes and livelihoods. And the closure, I mean, these, to a large extent, was a partial lockdown. Of course, it wasn't a strict lockdown. People were still allowed to move up and about, but the country was in some form of lockdown, a mild one, I must say. And so this posed a threat to the country's food system, particularly the former subsystem. I can call it that. And by the former system, I mean food channels, such as these chain stores, these established supermarkets, these established markets. So that channel was particularly affected because much of the produce that is found in those stores, actually a sizable number of that, a sizable portion of that comes from imports, mainly from South Africa. And South Africa was in a total lockdown. So it meant that the supply chain was actually seriously interrupted. So as COVID-19 raged on, it raised fears of economic losses and food insecurity in the country. So what are some of the pathways that COVID-19, was expected to affect food security in Zambia? So this is how the country, expected that the pandemic was going to affect, the food security and the economy at large. So there were expectations that informal food markets are going to be closed or will be under, very stringent, measures that will restrict the flow of food and also just the availability of food. And with that, it meant that food access and availability was going to be affected, particularly for households that are low income, that tend to be in high density areas, because these markets are the main sources of food for most of these low income households, because food there is quite affordable. And so this would have resulted in loss of income and livelihoods, which would have resulted in a food insecurity. And also we could have seen a rise in unemployment, particularly for daily casual workers, who work in markets, bus stations. Then there was also expectation that the limited supply of food commodities in chain stores that I earlier on mentioned due to lockdown in exporting countries like South Africa was going to result in shortage of these essential food commodities in those chain stores. And we also expected that there was going to be an increased food waste, particularly for perishables, because if these informal markets, actually this is where most of this food is sold, were going to be closed, then the food was not going to find its way to the market and it was going to go to waste, and that would have just added to the burden of food insecurity. Then this would have resulted in increase in food prices for essential and basic commodities. So these were some of the major fears that the country, that gripped the country at that point. And so even when stakeholders were coming up with measures, they had this, sort of thinking process at the back of their mind. So what did government and other stakeholders do to try and cushion, the effect of COVID-19 on food security? So I'll just focus mostly on food security. So the table that I have here shows the type of response, the objective of the response, and who was responsible for that. So the first one was the emergency cash transfers, which the government and other stakeholders, particularly the UN agencies and other NGOs, implemented. So initially, it was run for 6 months. I think this started sometime in June, if I'm not mistaken. And so a number of households were identified, those that were identified to be vulnerable and poor, were targeted and then listed, registered, and they became eligible to receive the cash transfers amounting to 400 kwacha a month, which translates to something like $20 per month. So the objective was to improve food access for vulnerable rural as well as urban areas. So this was done in both rural and urban areas. As I mentioned earlier on, this was done by the government through the Ministry of Community Development and Social Services, together with the UN agencies and other NGOs. Then the government, through the Ministry of Agriculture, increased the volume of strategic grain reserves, mostly maize, corn. And besides that, they also imposed a total ban on maize exports or maize meal exports. Zambia is one of the key producers of maize in the southern and central region, and it exports to neighboring countries, Malawi, Mozambique, DRC, Tanzania, and many other neighboring countries. So the thinking behind this was to increase national food reserve as a contingency plan, in the era of COVID, and also to help stabilize domestic prices by curtailing exports. That was the thinking of the government. And then there was also a rural poor stimulus facility, which was still being implemented by IFA, the International Fund for Agricultural Development. The aim was to provide farming inputs and also help link these poor and vulnerable farmers, to markets. And then the government decided, not to close the informal food markets, but rather keep them open, but maintain a high level, of adherence to the recommended health protocols, such as putting hand washing facilities, sanitizers, and also making the wearing of a mask as you enter these markets mandatory. So the idea was to maintain informal food markets and ensure that the poor and vulnerable could continue to access food at an affordable price. The other measures were, the bilateral agreement that the Zambian government and South African government, signed, to ensure that there was a continuous flow of essential commodities from South Africa into Zambia and also from Zambia into South Africa. But still, the lockdown in South Africa and also the containment measures in Zambia had an effect on the supply chain because we witnessed delays because of the intensified, screening at border points as truckloads were coming into the country. They now had to spend more time at the border, undergoing health screening. And so the supply chain of food and other commodities was interrupted. And because of that, chain stores started to experience shortages. And this created an opportunity which our government leveraged and encouraged our local producers, the farmers, to start producing fresh produce to supply to these chain stores and fill up the import gap, that was being created by the lockdown in South Africa. So the question then is, how effective were or are these responses that I've just highlighted? So I'll start with the effect on food prices. The graph that you see in front of you there shows you the price of four basic food commodities. That is maize meal, then we've got beef, we've got dried beans, and then we've got carpenter, which some of you might know as anchovy. It's quite a very important food commodity here in Zambia. And so from the graph, you would see that around March, there was an uptick in the price of most of these commodities. And that coincided with a time when Zambia first recorded COVID cases. And so as the country was trying to figure out, how to deal with the COVID, there was a shock in the food system, in the supply chain. And I think that, led to a surge in prices for most of these commodities. But with time, the prices let up and over time they started to stabilize. But for maize meal, I must be quick to mention that the dip that you see for maize meal beginning sometime in April was because this is the time when Zambia actually harvests. It's the major or the main harvest period of maize in Zambia. And so that period experienced some supply boost from the new harvest. And so that, translated into, led to prices letting up and later on stabilizing. But also what has been attributed to the arresting of the rising prices and eventual stabilization was maintaining the informal food markets open. This helped a lot, especially for low income households. So what was the effect of COVID-19 on household income? So a recent survey that IAPRI and their partners that includes Kulisa and USAID conducted actually showed the results that are in front of you. So you'd see that most households say they were affected because businesses had become very slow. And then we had about 15% who said they were unable to work due to health concerns. And then we also had about 16% who said businesses were closed. And the closure of business was not just affecting the business owner, but it was also affecting the people, their employees and other service providers. And so it was a ripple effect. And we had about 10% who indicated having lost employment. 8% had their salary reduced. 3% were put on unpaid leave. And all these, resulted in low or complete loss of income by households. And so this now had an effect on a household's ability to access food. So the effect of keeping the informal markets, open, actually was that food should be available in the markets. It should be readily available. And that, I think, objective was met because food was readily available in both formal and informal markets. However, a number of households, actually the majority of households who were interviewed, indicated that their accessibility to food was limited due to disruption in their income earnings. As of September, an estimated 69% of households had income earnings affected by COVID-19, and they had to, adjust their consumption patterns. They had to make substitutes for certain staples, and about 40% and 21% reported not accessing staple food, due to price increases or just lack of income. And the cash transfers, helped a few households to boost their incomes, but it was just a handful of households, of course, because of limited resources. The government and other agencies could not reach everyone. So the emergency cash transfer was only implemented, and up to now, it's only implemented in 18 districts out of about 130 districts that Zambia currently has. So this is just to give you a picture or a sense of how little, a government assistance has been, in trying to cushion the effects of COVID-19. And not that the government, is not doing much, but the problem is just too big on the ground. So you can see from the households that we surveyed, both rural and urban, about 0.6% said they received food assistance. The cash transfers, only about 0.2%. Those who received, some loan, that was about 0.1%. Subsidies, 0.2%. And tax cuts was only about 0.4%. And about 98.6% said they did not receive any form of assistance. So this just gives you a sense of how big this problem is, and how thinly, government resources have been spread on the ground. So, what are some of the coping strategies that households have employed, to cope with the effects of COVID-19? So, most households actually indicated that they had to use their savings, to cover living expenses. Others had to look for other jobs, particularly those who were in the hospitality and entertainment sectors, because those were the hardest hit. People lost jobs, and so they had to look for other jobs. And then we had about 2% who said that they relied on religious organizations, to cover their living expenses. 0.1%, indicated that they had to go on the streets to beg for food or ask from other households. And then we had about 0.7% who indicated that they migrated back to their home village because life in the village is less expensive compared to being in the city. And so this just gives you a feel that, households had to employ different coping strategies just to cope with the shock of the pandemic. Another effect that is prominent was the effect on crop marketing and rural incomes. As I mentioned earlier on, the government decided to actually triple the procurement of, the volumes of the strategic grain reserves. Usually the government would purchase about, like the last year, the government purchased about 300,000, they had planned rather to purchase 300,000 metric tons. And then the rest, is supposed to be for the private sector to purchase and export, and for the millers, and just for everyone else who is involved in the value chain. But when the COVID-19 pandemic struck, what the government did was to increase that volume to 1 million metric tons. And this was against the budgeted 300,000 metric tons. So this intention by government to procure so much maize created uncertainty in the market. And at the same time, the government also closed the borders and banned any exports. And so this created uncertainty in the market, and the private sector became very cautious, and their participation in the grain market was very limited, because they knew that if the government is planning to buy 1 million metric tons, then most likely much of that maize would soon find itself in the market at a low price, and the private sector would stand out to lose. And so they were very edgy and cautious. And because of that, we saw the prices of maize, which is the main staple grain in the country, go down. Meanwhile, the prices in our neighboring countries like Malawi, DRC, even Tanzania, were much higher. And so this kind of, denied the farmers, the traders, the opportunity, to to make good earnings from exporting maize to the neighboring countries. And also, these low domestic maize prices resulted in low incomes for most smallholder farmers who grow maize, because we have about, I think, 98 or 99% of our smallholder farmers grow maize, and most of them grow it for consumption and for sale. But because the domestic prices, have been dampened by these interventions that government instituted, most farmers had their incomes, not as they had expected. Their incomes are low because they're selling their produce at a low price. And that has resulted in them not having enough, to meet uh, their expenses, to access other food and improve their, food diversity and nutrition. So, what is the current food security status in Zambia? Now after talking about what the effect of those policies have been in cushioning the food insecurity. So in this current season, Zambia, produced a very good harvest. It was above average. The graph that you see here compares the output for food and non-food crops from the previous season and the current season. So the current season is in orange and the previous season is in blue. And you see that for most crops, the orange is towering over the blue, showing that the country produced um, a very good harvest. And this, helped increase the supply of food on the market, as well as created an income opportunity for those who had produced surplus for sale. And so this has helped in maintaining or stabilizing the food security situation at the national level. And then in terms of maize, which I mentioned earlier is the main staple grain for the country, again, we see that the country produced about 25.5% above the expected average. And compared to last year, the country produced about 69%. And so there was enough maize, for domestic market as well as for export. And so generally, the food security situation can be described as favorable and stable at the moment. That is at the country level. When you get down to the household level, uh, the loss of income, due to loss of businesses, people lost jobs and wages, has affected the people's ability, the purchasing power to be able to access food. Even if food is there on the market, but a number of households actually, most of the households cannot access the food because they don't have the purchasing power. Government has come in with the UN agencies providing cash transfers, but they've only provided to so many households in selected rural and urban centers. And this, as I showed in the other graph, I think has not been as effective. If you look at the national picture, because you're only talking about 18 districts out of the 130 districts in the country. And generally, the country has sufficient food stocks of maize and other food crops. And food prices continue to show signs of stability, mostly driven by the fact that markets are open, and so the supply system or the supply chain, food supply chain, remains functional. Despite the COVID-19. So, what is the short to medium term outlook in terms of food security? So, at the national level, again, food security will remain stable and favorable due to the increased production from the previous season, and also to some level, the timely and swift response by government and stakeholders. The Zambia Meteorological Department has projected that the current production season will experience normal to above normal rainfall. And if these projections hold true, and also coupled with timely distribution of inputs, the country is expected to produce at least average, production. And this will be very good for the country. However, let me be quick to mention that COVID is not yet gone, and there's potential that it could disrupt input supply because Zambia imports most of its input, particularly fertilizer and agrochemicals. And if COVID, continues, it might also lead, to labor shortages due to illnesses, and this might affect, the production going forward. And in the medium term, we might get a shock in terms of food security. Food prices are likely to remain stable as markets remain open and food supply is quite stable at the moment. The continued social cash transfer programs by the government and other stakeholders will continue, to help improve food access among the poor and vulnerable for those who are going to be beneficiaries. So just to summarize, I can summarize that generally the responses that were involved have generally been successful in safeguarding national food security. But there's more that has to be done now to get to the households, empower them with that purchasing power so that they can access the food. And social cash transfers are helping, but there's need, to scale them up so that we can reach as many poor and vulnerable households as possible. Then government market intervention, I think, affected the market in a very negative way. And picking from what Dr. Adewale mentioned, I think this is not the time for countries to start restricting exports. If there's a time that exports, have to be promoted, trade should be enhanced, time could never be right because export bans, just create this regional food security, depresses domestic prices, and in the long run, it's also going to depress domestic production, which also results into further food security going forward. Lastly, Zambia's largely informal food system, I think to me, has shown some resiliency. Yes, it has been shocked and is still adjusting, but the informal food channels, the informal food system in Zambia, I think, has played a very key role in seeing the country's food security to even where it is now. Had it not been for that, if Zambia had, gone flat out and just, closed these informal food markets, I think the food security situation would have been much worse than it is now, especially at the household level. Lastly, this is my last slide. What is IAPRI doing to try and contribute to responding to COVID-19? So IAPRI, being a think tank, we can only, our main work, is to provide evidence-based guidelines and recommendations to stakeholders so that the right policies and interventions, are put in place. So IAPRI is tracking impacts of COVID-19 on food security and nutrition, markets and trade. We have created an online platform where we collect, and share information on food security. It's still in its nascent stage, but we're still building it. And we are tracking essential food commodity prices, availability of agricultural inputs. And we are part of a team that is conducting the monthly surveys that are tracking household food and nutrition security in the era of COVID-19. Then we also have a unit that is tracking government policy responses, trying to monitor how government is responding to the changing landscape with regards to COVID-19. So at this point, let me stop and thank you. Thanks everyone for listening. Thank you. Back to you, Eben.
All right, thank you very much, Brian. And thank you to Dr. Adewale also. I guess maybe Damaris did that already, but I lost my internet for a minute. And forgive me, everyone, that I had to turn my video off because my internet is not stable. So I'm trying to make it work as much as possible. So I wouldn't waste too much time. I'll just go into the discussion section and then bring it back to you, audience, so that you come in with your questions and your discussion prompts that would help us have a meaningful discussion. Maybe to start off with the discussions, I see that Dr. Adewale put out the question to Brian, asking about the fact that in Zambia, production wasn't affected by the pandemic. And I see Paul responding and saying that maybe it's because the infections came close to harvest time, or that maybe it's because the infections were in the big towns. And so, but I don't know what Brian thinks. So Brian, what do you agree with Paul?
Yes, I do agree with Paul. In Zambia, the agricultural production season, the main agricultural production season, starts in October, and then it goes all the way to April. So in March, when we recorded our first cases of COVID, the production activities had already been implemented, and farmers were just waiting to harvest. Most crops, actually, if not all crops, had already reached physiological, maturity, and people were just waiting to harvest. And so that's what that could be. Not that could be actually. That is the explanation why production was not affected. Then there was a fear that if COVID, spreads quickly into the rural areas during that period, then what was going to be affected was the harvesting. But luckily enough, as you saw from the graph and as Paul mentioned, the spread into the rural areas was quite slow, and so labor for harvest was not affected. Over.
Right, nice, sounds good. Maybe a follow-up that I have, and still coming from Dr. Adewale, is that how about the situation of vegetables and then animal products and then aquaculture as well? Because And I guess he's asking this because those usually happens in peri-urban and urban settings as well.
That's a very good question. And so what we saw really was, as I mentioned, a partial lockdown, and so people were still being allowed, to move around within districts. Labor was still available, to produce vegetables, fruits, horticultural products, and to take care of their livestock, the poultry. And so, because of the kind of relaxed lockdown that we still had labor being available. We still had poultry feed producers and sellers still selling. Only that we had restricted movements, and people were being encouraged to adhere to the recommended health protocols. And so that relaxed version of a lockdown, I think, helped to cushion, what would have been um, uh, a big knock on these other sectors. And then also the informal markets that I talked about. That's where most of these fresh produce like vegetables, fruits, and even poultry, mostly chickens and goats, are mostly sold. And so by keeping those open, um, the system was still able to absorb what was being produced in these farms into the market. And so for me, that's why I said at the end that the informal, food system actually showed some resiliency, but it's because of the decision that the government took not to close down the informal markets. Uh, I don't know if that responds to that question, but that's not to say that there wasn't um, any effect on these other fresh produce. There was, because the supply of some of the chemicals and inputs, were coming from South Africa, and South Africa was in lockdown. Even if we had that bilateral agreement where they should allow, commodities to flow smoothly in Zambia, but there was delays at border points because of intensified health screening, and so there was a bit of shortage of some of the inputs that are used to produce those commodities. Over.
Sounds good. So I don't see any more questions in the chat. So before I go to people to ask questions verbally, let me ask this general one to both you and Brian, then Dr. Adewale. So one thing that caught my attention is the fact that most of the people in the surveys that your organizations took said that they didn't receive any form of assistance during the lockdown periods. And I'm curious because in both situations, you mentioned in your presentations that there were some assistance that government and other organizations were given, particularly for the case of Zambia. You talked about the UN and the government doing some direct cash transfer. So the question I have is that I guess most likely these cash transfers and other government interventions in the case of Nigeria were targeted. And so I'm wondering, your surveys, were the surveys conducted in those target populations, and still we have majority of people saying they didn't get those assistance, or your surveys were conducted in the general population, and so maybe the surveys just missed those targeted population that those assistance were meant for? So either of you can go first, or can just.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Actually, to be sincere, there's a challenge. Let me say now, we're talking about Africa, sub-Saharan African countries. Either we like it or not, this is what is happening, and people also know us for. Our execution of ideas, good ideas, be good. The way we execute projects in this part of the world is still questionable. Good, the government had nice idea, nice policy, good plan to reach out to the populace, the vulnerable, to assist them. But the way this idea was executed was questionable. In fact, over the media, uh, radio, the news, even up to now, people are trying to raise questions, asking the government how is the method that was used in distributing this palliative, the assistance, talk of cash transfer, talk of food, raw food. So it's still questionable. The vulnerable, the target groups, majority did not get all these things. Well, your question is also questions that many people are asking, but no response or no direct answer to the question up to now. But the fact remains that the statistics that you saw are statistics from the majority of people within the country, not some selected target group. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. Brian, is it the same situation in your case?
Hi, thanks. That's a very good question. The situation in our case is a little bit different, but I think Dr. Adewale is on point to say that in this part of the world, good intentions, good interventions, tend to be spoiled by the way they are implemented. And a good case is the same issue of, these assistance, be it social cash transfers, be it food assistance. It's the issue of targeting and also the implementers, not following the laid down procedures when it comes to identifying, who is eligible and who is not. When you have cases of certain households being registered twice, receiving social cash transfers twice, and others are not receiving, and others who are able are on the list, but others who are not on the list. But in speaking to the numbers, like in the case of Zambia, it's the way we sampled, I must say. So we did not only go to the districts where the government and its partners are implementing, these interventions. Rather, ours was a national, not national, but we went to like 30 districts when government is only in 18. And it's not that we sampled all those 18, because our interest was to give a national picture. And the other thing also might not be directly related to this, but it's the fact that we used phone surveys, and phone surveys can be a challenge in certain parts of Africa or in certain parts of countries in Africa because of network challenges and all that. And so sometimes you're not able to reach, the people that you had sampled. And so maybe that could also have an effect on the numbers, because if it's systematic that those who are actually in need, especially in the rural areas, the people who are likely to be in need are the poor and vulnerable. Maybe they don't even have access to a phone anymore, or they are in the most remote part of the country, and so you miss those out, and so that could have an effect on the numbers. But yes, the problem could be that we went national, whereas the interventions at the moment are only sub-national. So that could speak to the low numbers that we've, we've, we've presented.
Great, great, great. I appreciate those clarifications coming from both of you. I guess at this point, I will go to the general audience, and if anybody has a question or a comment, you can just raise your hand. If you go to the participants list, you can see raise your hand, the hand raising icon there. You can raise your hand, and then I'll ask you to come in with your question or comments.
Maxine Kane has her hand raised.
All right, sorry, I didn't catch that. Maxine, you can go ahead.
Okay.
Good to see you here.
Good to be here. It really is. I like the format of tea time. I was listening to a presentation from the gentleman from Nigeria and Zambia, and you seem to be doing quite well there, I think, considering. And I was wondering, are the countries, surrounding countries that are not doing, they are really, really struggling in lieu of the COVID-19?
Brian and Adewale, did you catch that?
Yeah, I think I did. Can okay. I shoot first?
Pardon me?
Sure, Brian, you can go ahead.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so I guess the question from Maxine is that the two countries that have been that we've talked about, Zambia and Nigeria, seem to be doing better than expected. Now she was wondering if there are other countries, around these countries that are doing much worse. So I can speak on the southern central part of Africa, because that's where I'm located, and that's where Zambia is. South Africa was one of the hardest hit countries. The numbers in South Africa in terms of infection rates, the death, were, I think, among, if not the highest in Africa. And South Africa went in total lockdown. And a lot of people lost jobs. A lot of people lost their sources of livelihoods. And I'm not sure if you saw this in the news, but at some point, people, just couldn't take it anymore. And they just went out and started looting the shops, grabbing food and all that. So South Africa is one of the countries that was hardest hit. Another country is the Democratic Republic of Congo. So because the Democratic Republic of Congo, especially the southern part, relies so much on imports for its food. And so when the neighboring countries, imposed partial lockdowns and also had stringent, screening at the border points, the flow of food in the DRC was very much affected, and food security was very much affected. Zimbabwe too. Zimbabwe was highly affected. One, because production there in Zimbabwe, ag production is really gone. It's nothing to talk about. They rely so much on imports from South Africa, Zambia, and international markets. And so the pandemic just hit them way much than I've heard on Nigeria and from Zambia. So those are the countries that I can pick out from this part of the continent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Adewale, do you have any additions that you want to talk about in the West African region?
Yeah, thank you. I can only talk for Benin Republic. Even though Nigeria share border with Benin Republic and Cameroon, okay, I know that Benin Republic, to some people, is like you are still within Nigeria. For people moving easily from Nigeria to Benin Republic and from Benin Republic to Nigeria. The policy that was brought up within Nigeria affects the Beninese people a lot because in Nigeria, as I mentioned, we had border closure for so long. And normally we have foods like chicken, processed chicken and turkey that comes in from Benin Republic into Nigeria. Normally, these foodstuffs comes from France into Benin Republic. So they normally move them down to Nigeria. But because of the border closure for about 4-5 months, this did not happen. The people in Benin were not happy because they could not sell their produce, their goods, but it encourages and helps the livestock farmers in Nigeria to get more markets. Okay, and there has been policy or there has been campaign before then encouraging people to eat more of live chicken than the processed chicken. So because of the inability of people to get the processed chicken and turkey from Benin into Nigeria, they shifted to the purchase and consumption of live chicken. Also, rice. We have more of rice coming into Nigeria from Benin Republic. And most of the time, these produce come in illegally because we are very close. They bring them in through different means. Most of the time, they don't come through the normal border. Okay, they have their own way of operating, those smugglers. So that also affects the rice that they used to bring into the country. And before now, the government has also come up with a policy of Nigerians feeding Nigerians. So there is policy encouraging rice cultivation. People do have option of getting processed rice from Benin Republic. So they leave or they left consuming or purchasing the local rice. But during the pandemic, most people started buying and consuming the local rice that is processed and produced within the country. So this also affects the people in Benin. But for Cameroon, you know, they have challenges in Cameroon. There is a part in Cameroon that has been war since. So, and this issue of insurgents also going on there. So, but I can only say more about the challenges that is being faced at Benin Republic. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. I can really relate to Dr. Adewale's point regarding Nigeria and how it had been trying to encourage consumption of local produce, and because prior to the lockdowns due to COVID, I remember how there were serious talks between the government of Ghana and the government of Nigeria regarding those border closures, because they were having serious effects on Ghanaian businesses and transporters. So I can really appreciate how that plays in the case of Nigeria and how it helped the preparedness of the Nigerian market for the pandemic. I don't know if anybody has questions at this point. I don't see any hands up. Okay, let me go to the chats and see if there are questions, new questions there. Dr. Damaris, if you are talking, you are muted.
Yes, I'm muted. I'm so sorry. I had a quick question for Dr. Wale. I mean,
go ahead.
Yes, you mentioned something in your presentation about the percentage, I should say, of male and female children that were able to continue learning at home. You said, is it 54%, I probably think male, and 46% of female? Is that in proportion to the number of enrolled students, or you're just generally talking about, so I'm just wondering about in relation to what? What are these percentages in relation to? Because perhaps there were few female students enrolled, so do those percentages relate to the enrollment, or generally there were fewer female children who were able to access learning from home?
Yeah, actually, the data that I presented was a data from a recent survey, not conducted by me, but a recent survey conducted for the government. And the people that did the survey happen to be a respected researcher that I know, a professor that was once in my university. So I quoted from their work. But as a Nigerian and somebody that was also in Nigeria when that happens, I can easily relate that data to what I can also explain as because the data that I presented show more for female than male, more of the girls, 56 for the girls, I think 46 for the boys, if I'm, yeah. So, but what happened is that during that period, you see more of the boys playing footballs. They play football. They don't stay much at home. They see it as a time to enjoy themselves. Okay? But ordinarily, well, in my own home also, maybe I should just share that I'm the only male in my house. I have 4 girls with my wife, a female. So every day I use that opportunity to have a walk. Okay, they stay at home, use their time to study. I go out to have a walk like 1.5 hours in the morning before coming back. Okay, so you see the female folks using that time for using the time more beneficially than the male folks. So, which is something that will also count. But the issue really is not about the percentage of the gender, but the issue really is that the majority of people in Nigeria, the school age children, did not enjoy that time. The government claimed that they make programs available for the students, the children, but it was not the case. For example, the case in South Africa. In South Africa, the students were given 40 gig of internet facility every month, free. The students were also given laptops free for those that do not have. So the government encourages them to study. But in Nigeria, all this were not provided. So this is the issue, really. So good, students are at home. There was a challenge, which is global, national, but the government was not really helping the students. So that was the real issue. So, and don't forget, we have West African examination that comes up that everybody was looking or waiting for. They were about to start before the pandemic issue started. and the children are at home expecting that they're going to write the exam. And all of a sudden, the government says they have to write the West African examination. Majority of them, all of them are home. No any assistance from any source, and they have to go and write the exam. So these are really the issue at hand. Thank you.
I have a question. So they don't have government assistance and they are required to write their exams. Is there any outpour of resistance? Is someone overtly challenging that on behalf of the children?
Yeah, thank you. Good question, good idea. But the issue is that who is going to challenge that? These are poor children. They are there, coming from poor family. The advocacy group are there not doing what they should do. Even if they started saying, okay, government are not doing this, are not doing that. That is if the government is ready to listen and to do the right. People can complain, but the issue is that who is ready to listen to your complaint and also to do the right thing? So it's a big challenge in this part of the world.
Good question and interesting response from Dr. Adewale. And I see your hand up. Is it still up?
Yeah, it is. Thank you. Sorry, I was just
Great.
yeah. So mine is just a comment, and I'd like Brian and Dr. Brian and Dr. Adewale to chime into these findings. So we work with farmers in Western Kenya, and we had this small pilot project with these smallholder farmers. And what we found out was that the farmers say that due to COVID-19, they think the next harvest for next year is going to be affected because they were not able to sell their products, and therefore, as they're trying to farm this time around, they have to do a lot of costs of production reduction. So what they say that they are planning to do is to try and have less acreage for planting because they cannot be able to pay for the cost of labor, and they were not able to access pesticides during that period. Some of them started using traditional ways of controlling pests, for example, using ash. And therefore, what we tend to project from this data that we collected is that next year we're going to have a shortage of food, especially in this part of Western Kenya, and that could be maybe in the whole country. So with such findings, the idea is to share this with various policymakers or individuals who make decisions, so that we can mitigate this shortage of food, or this idea of a lack of food or lack of food resilience in the region and the country, or maybe even in Africa as a whole. Because this could just be what these farmers are saying, but if we look closer to experiences of farmers all over Africa, we might be able to find out what this can teach us about next year, the years to come. So yeah, I'd like others to chime in what they're seeing in their regions.
Great comment there. I don't know if Brian or Dr. Adewale has anything to say in relation to Anne's comment.
Yeah, just to support what she said. And, I also mentioned that, and also as part of the question that I was asking from Brian, that in Nigeria case, that is what really happened. And that is why I said, come next year, there's going to be a real crisis. Okay, and we've started experiencing that now in Nigeria with increase in food prices.
And it looks like it's back to you.
Yes, I think I lost my internet for a second.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Great. I think we just went past 2 hours. So I'm not seeing any hands up and I'm not seeing any questions in the chat column. So I think it's a good time to bring it back to you, Damaris, for any closing comments and saying thank you to our presenters.
All right. First, I'd like to say thank you to you, Eben. Eben is in Ghana. You should know that he's also late for him. But thank you so much for sacrificing together with the presenters from Africa to be here. And to Doctors Mulenga and Wale, I'll call you Wale now. We really appreciate your time. It's been a very intriguing discussions because as Eben said in the beginning, food is just a basic need. And there's a reason why we should be here talking about it, because we can't have a stable economy or stable social life without meeting these basic needs. And I think personally, I've been happy to know that as much as the projections, especially for Nigeria, and I probably think for many other African countries, is not that good going forward, it does look like some countries like Zambia are having some success. Given, I think perhaps it's because it depends on first, how hard did the pandemic hit to begin with, especially in the rural areas? That would be a reason for sure, because it looks like in Zambia, of course, it did hit in pretty much parts in the urban areas or central areas of the country, but it does look like life went on close to normal in the rural areas, and that's where agricultural activities mostly take place. So after these few months, it didn't affect the planting season, and it does look like things look close to normal. And in other countries, for example, in Nigeria and in Kenya, I would say, as Annie has shared, it could be different. So I really love listening to some of these talks like this, I should say, because it gives us a bigger picture, because it could be like, oh, we're worried about all African countries, or we're all good. We're not affected that much. But perhaps knowing the big picture and the full story might help us really think about, it would be hard, but not very hard if we can be able to import or assist one another in that case. So thank you really so much. I appreciate your time again. And for all the people that have been able to join until the end, I see it's 12 of us. We do appreciate. We look forward to seeing you again. This was our last event for this semester though, but we'll begin in January 21. We'll continue with the talks, and we'll be sharing the schedule soon for the January discussions. Other than that, I really don't know if Eben, you had something to share or talk about before we finish completely?
No, except to say thank you once again to our presenters. We really appreciate considering the time.
Thank you so much. So this brings us.
Thank you too.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It was an interesting interaction. Thank you.
Great, great, great.
We look forward to engaging with you more in the future. Perhaps we can come back and look back and forward and see where we are at that point. So we definitely appreciate your time and everything. Looking forward to talking to you and engaging with you more in the future. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, thank you.